maybe just planting a seed in the ground and then reaping the fruit, maybe even literally reaping the fruits of that which you sow, then sure, I have nothing against that sort of capitalism. What I have something against is the sort of a class of capital owners having a much wider sort of array of sort of power or lack of accountability or transparency within this class of people. The disparity between them and the wage earners is something that I'm opposing to. Working on a seed, we'll get to Scott and we'll get to more questions. Working on the seed, you know, you're just working on something and then getting the product from it. I don't see anything wrong with that. I also don't see any sort of system out of that. Maybe you could extrapolate from there. I'm speaking generally, not you specifically, but maybe you could extrapolate from there and create some sort of system based on that. But I don't see how that is a big deal or noteworthy.
And this is the thing about hypothetical, abstracted ideas, like especially when you just say a seed. Well, it's like, well, how did you get to the land? How did you get the seed? Did you kill a group of people to get to it? Did your forefathers do that? You know, like we can't abstract. This is what economists always try to do, and they fucking sound like freaks to me. I'm like, you cannot externalize everything. It's all wrapped up, and there's been no form of capitalism that has ever existed that has not been exploitative, oppressive, and also accumulation of wealth for a handful of people. Not a single one, even before they even turn the coin of that. And I'm not a Marxist at all, and I don't even ascribe to much Marxist theory about stuff. You can just see it. And the social relations is once people start to accumulate wealth and power, that they exploit further. And that happens over and over again. And we just see it super out of control now with corporations. Multinational corporations are the worst form of it that could ever exist. Whereas I'd also say for communism, the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, was the worst form of that could ever exist. But so in any hypothetical, don't extract it. And the thing is about entomology, because I think it's important in abstracts to think about those, but how does it relate to the real world? How does it relate to our social relations with each other? Not just in exchange, but in everything. So, and because at some point, anytime you accumulate wealth, somebody or something is exploited at some level that may not even be contacted to you, right? And if we externalize that, if we make it away from our world, that it's still there. Like we just may not see it. We may be able to make it offshore. So, in my opinion.
Well, anyway, just quick. There's two dichotomies, if that's the right word, that need to be examined here. One is the idea between violence, coercion, and voluntary action. And this is kind of embodied by the state and the market. But there's another one, and you brought this up, and I'm recalling that conversation between Stefan Molyneux and the producer of the Zeitgeist films, Peter Joseph, where they ended up talking past each other because Stefan Molyneux was talking about the violence of the state as opposed to the voluntarism of the market, and Joseph kept using this term structural violence, okay? And Molyneux was saying, what does that mean, okay? I think the other dichotomy is that of hierarchy and a more flat, kind of consensual, consensus structure. And I think that is an important point to bring out because many of us here, understand that the state, is unethical, immoral, and has to go. But then that leaves us with, well, what do we do with the market, okay? And I think that if we start addressing this idea of hierarchies and the idea of the inefficiency of a bureaucratic system, even if it's in a market context, it still works an injustice on many people in that structure. And I think our discussion would be informed by looking at both of these dichotomies. Because I think, obviously, mistaking a corporation for violence, I think, is way overplaying it. a lot of people on the left will talk about how violent, you know, the violence of corporations, and yet it's the state that's the violent ones. And the libertarian types will go, no, 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 the state's violent. The corporations don't do business by violence. They do business by, you know, customer, you know, service. But I think if we look at this concept of hierarchies and look at the concept of bureaucracies, which is common to both the market and the state, I think we can start threading out some kind of a path towards a solution.
One thing to look at that helps bring these definitions into libertarians' way of looking at things, because what we're really talking about in a lot of ways here is just definitions. What definition are we using when we're holding this discussion? So here's, keeping it simple, the guys that set up the Federal Reserve Bank were capitalists. In other words, they used capital to influence the state, to write laws in their favor, giving them a cartel monopoly over the use of money, and their manipulation of the central banking system after that robs from everybody, moving all that money into the hands of one class of people, the capitalists. But it's buried in looking to the public like, oh, these are these people that invest in corporations and they produce goods and services for us, and so they're good guys because they invest and they produce. Like Ayn Rand liked them because they were producers instead of parasites. Anybody that criticized them was considered a parasite. But the fact that they invest and produce conceals what Kevin Carson calls the subsidy of history. Everything that came before that was they stole all the money from all the people that they invested. And the corporations that they formed through essentially legal fiat because they had enough lawyers and they bribed enough legislators to write laws in their favor to create their monopolies on intellectual property and their corporate structure. What's ignored by most libertarians is all the people that were injured, killed, stolen from, squeezed out of the market in the process of building that structure up, where now they appear to be producers.
I just want to talk about that. So one thing, here's the thing, like entomology I think is important, like we talked about earlier, like to degrees in abstract, but really, like, what we're talking about is changing social relations and economic relations and stuff. So if there's so much baggage around certain things, people ask me this about anarchy, why do you use the word anarchy? I never use the word anarchism, I use the word anarchy, right? Because I don't want it to be an ideology. But the thing is, if we all in this room said, we're a community, let's pretend, and the same with capital, I think any of these words, that they don't mean whatever was written in 1830 or 1870 or 1950, they take on different meanings for different people. But like with anarchy or anything, why not just dump that word if it doesn't work? If there's a lot of, if we spend so much time trying to redefine it and trying to carve out the space, because I don't want to be right, I don't want to be correct, I want liberation, and I want you to want liberation, right? And so, like, for me, like, if we all said, you know, next week, like, whatever we're all engaged in, we're gonna call it blue potato. I'm down for that. I don't have to go like, no man, it's anarchy. I'm anarchist. I'm like, no man, let's just call it blue potato. That's fine. It doesn't matter. You know, like in Argentina, after the turn of the century, you know, 2001, when their economy collapsed, the left dumped the baggage of communism and anarchism, and they started calling it horizontalism. It wasn't just a semantic change. They wanted to change the way that they thought about how they engaged with each other. Even if they were taking ideas from this. The Zapatistas do the same thing. They call it Zapatismo. They don't call it socialism. They don't call it communism. They don't call it anarchism. They have elements of all of those in them. And they call it Zapatismo. And again, they weren't just doing it to brand it. They're like, but so for me, I'm always like when we start debating the minutia of words like capital, does it matter? Well, it only matters because because our lives aren't at stake right this moment. It's like mental masturbation, which I think is important, or stretching of ideas to degrees. I think that there's important times for that in important places. But the thing is, nobody is ever going to say, capitalism is never going to become a good thing. It's never going to become a good word. It's never going to have a root that people are going to go like, yeah, I'm in on that. I can totally deal with that. It's not going to happen. I can tell you, I mean, communism never did, and it had way more influence in the United States for for decades, more than the libertarian movement's having in the United States at this moment. And the thing is, this is just my opinion on this. I mean, I'm not the authority on it, But like, but if it was me and I kept getting blowback from that, I would start to look differently and go like, what other ways can I exchange? Can I talk about the things that I talk about? And I've had this conversation with anarcho-capitalists a lot. I mean, some of my good friends are there, and they talk about this is what capitalism means. And I'm like, that's good. Why don't you just dump that word and figure out something else? And if you're like, well, why don't you dump anarchism? I'm like, okay, let's do it. You know. So anyway, that's my 75 cents on that.
Yeah, something really briefly. In one of Roderick Long. Yeah, we're gonna get to Joel next. Joel is next.
All right.
In one of Roderick T. Long's talk, the left and right prospects for liberty 40 years later, he uses this word called Zaxelbacks, and I mean, pretty much he talks about it as a giant metallic sphere like the Washington Monument. Now, obviously, if you were paying attention while I said the definition itself is internally inconsistent. There's a lot going on there just with that definition, and he says the same thing. He actually uses Rand's notion of anti-concepts, and he talks about that basically capitalism and socialism fit these definitions. So I'm kind of with Scott. I'm happy to drop these definitions because I was talking to somebody a few days ago about the free market and capitalism and why I think they conflict. And I kept trying to push it towards, man, hey, if you want to keep using that word, whatever. I think it's stupid and I think we should drop it. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to keep talking about it. Let's talk about principles. But he just wanted to keep talking about the definitions anyway. And just kept repeating the same thing. Oh, no, man, that's not the free market. That's not, that's not real capitalism. So it was like talking to a brick wall. So anyway, let's move on to Joel.
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sort of interested in capitalism beyond semantics. I mean, like I said, it's like you said, it's obvious that we figure out what we're talking about and define what we're talking about. I think it's well, who is it? Did you already talk about Gary Chartier's 3 definitions of capitalism?
No.
Like one, like a big business inclusion or in cooperation with government. 2, owners of capital control society, and 3, the free market. So if the 3rd definition is the free market, we have no beef. You know what I mean? If it's the 2nd or 3rd, we do. So the first definition, which is big business inclusion with government, it's impossible, obviously, without government. You in the state, you in capitalism 1. You in the state, you in capitalism 2, because it's likely that individual